We lost Isaac 22 years ago. He died in an accident in our home. And the days and weeks after that were very scary, incredibly painful. The trauma of it all was, wow, just something we're trying to wrap our heads around. It was so sudden and tragic. I have three other children, and to try to explain to them that their little brother wasn't coming home was the worst thing I've ever had to do in my life, as well as bury my own son. I really struggled with a lot of anger and just the intensity of the pain that created the depression and the anxiety and the anger. But I needed help. I needed to find some kind of support, and at the time, I really didn't know what that was. I really felt my faith, my family, and my friends would be what would get me through, but as the days and weeks unfolded, I found that I was drowning. I needed something to help me, and I just didn't know how to reach out for that and what that was. But eventually I did reach out for support for myself and my family, and that brought us into a place of where we felt real healing could happen for us. And I discovered that there is a difference between grief and mourning, that all of the feelings in which we go through and walk through are normal, that no two people on this planet will ever, mourn or grieve the same. And that grieving really is, it's a journey, it's not an event. And that can be really hard for people sometimes. I know it was my struggle.
So you've got this incredible family. You guys are, in so many ways, I mean, it would mirror, I think, how many of us in church today, many people out there started a family. Life mirrored what I think what it's like for many of us. We're starting a family, a growing family. We've got a great job. We're kind of starting a life together.
Mm-hmm.
You're in that incredible season of life where your kids are growing, and then the unthinkable kind of takes place, and you have to weather it, and you find yourselves experiencing the unthinkable. Bring us into kind of what took place. What was happening the day that a trauma hit your life where you thought, man, this had never happened to me in a million years? I'm sure that's what everybody thinks.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, a parent's worst nightmare that you never think is going to happen to you, for sure. So it was just a regular day. It was during the week. Stafford was at work. The girls were at school. Ethan was obviously not in school at that point, and I had a few women over in the morning for coffee time, and we do sort of a little, study of some sort.
Wow.
So Ethan and his little friend were down in the living room, and we were just having a chat and everything else. And all of a sudden, Isaac is with us, but I put him down in the playroom with the boys with a bottle. And the next thing I hear is Ethan calling me saying, "Hey, Mom, come quick." And I'm like, "What?" So I go flying down into the family room. I had no idea what happened to him at that point. One of my friends that were with me, she is a nurse. So it was such a God thing.
Wow.
She's doing that. Another friend's calling 911. I'm trying to keep it all together. And it was a blur, absolutely. Right. So ambulance gets there, worst ride of my life. I'm in the ambulance with them. We're going down, and I could tell by the conversation between the driver and the paramedic that something wasn't going right. So he was trying to intubate him. He was having a really difficult time doing that. So we get to the hospital. They want to take me and put me in a quiet room. Well, that's just, everything is going through your mind at that moment, and the shock and the trauma of what is actually happening. It felt like I was in a movie, like you just feel like this out-of-body experience. And so they're working on him, and they send a nurse in with me to try to calm me down and everything else, but calling friends and things like that. So the friends that were with me were absolutely incredible because they actually took over for me. They were able to take Ethan and Jordan and deal with them, and then call Stafford. They had to call Stafford. He was at work. He worked in air traffic control down at Pearson. We were 55 minutes away by car, and basically said, staff, you got to come up to the hospital. There's been a situation with Isaac. Meet Michele there. So meanwhile, I have no idea what's going on here. I am praying like crazy. I don't know what else to do. And all of a sudden, some of my friends start showing up. And one of the pastors that was at our church at the time was the kids pastor, but he was also a nurse. So he was able to go into the emergency room. And this was probably about 20 minutes after we arrived there. And all of a sudden, I got a couple of friends with me in the room trying to calm me down, trying to figure out what's going on.
Were you hysterical at this point?
Not quite yet, but I'm getting to the point that if you don't give me some news, I'm going to come through that door and I'm going to go find out myself.
Right.
So anyway, all of a sudden I realized that there's somebody standing outside the door wanting to come in and taking a little bit of time. And the door opens and it's this our children's pastor, and he comes up to me and he kneels down in front of me. And as soon as he did that, I knew this wasn't good. And I remember looking at him and he said to me, Michele, I'm so sorry. And I'm going, don't you dare. Don't you dare. And he said, I'm sorry, Isaac didn't make it. And I'm like, what? Like, what even happened? I have, like, how? What? And I remember screaming. And I remember screaming, God, how could you let this happen to me? That which I fear the most has come to me, and that is not right. I am your daughter, I'm your girl. This isn't the way this is supposed to happen. And I couldn't believe this. So I was spinning, obviously, with this information and not knowing how to obviously process the trauma that was happening at that point. Mm-hmm. And just a few minutes later, Stafford came in and he was greeted by another pastor at the door. And basically, unfortunately for Stafford, it was a little bit awkward because out of good intentions, he grabbed Stafford when he walked in the door and he said, Stafford, I'm really sorry, Isaac didn't make it. And Stafford's like, what? Like, didn't make what?
Man. And
so he hears me down the hall. Obviously, I am just a mess. I am wailing. And he comes into the room, and he was, at that point, he really felt God share with him and encourage him to say, look, she needs you right now. So he just absolutely was stellar and just came alongside me, really supported me, and just said, okay, like, we don't know what's happening here. Let's go find out. But while we were in emergency and stuff, we had the opportunity to, I guess, say goodbye to him in the way that we could. And staff, we just really felt to pray over him and to pray, God, do a miracle. You know, every parent, anybody that loses somebody wants that miracle, right? So
you're like, I'm going to raise this kid from the dead.
Right, God, like make him a sign and a wonder. Anyway, we just, we knew, Stafford knew pretty much halfway through that God's peace was definitely there. And we had a nurse that was in the room that came over to us later, and she handed me a piece of paper and she, I'm so sorry for your loss and everything else. And she said, I don't do this. I'm not allowed to do this, but I just felt so inspired to do this. And she was a Christian, a believer in that. And she gave me a piece of paper with a scripture on it, Isaiah 40:11, about he shall carry those with young lambs in his arms and that. And she really said to me that, she said, I really felt that I felt the Holy Spirit in the room and really saw Isaac's spirit with an angel's arms going up to heaven. And I was like, oh my gosh. And at that point, as much as what I would have wanted is to have my son back, for sure. Right. That was something that carried me for weeks and weeks. And like a shepherd, the scripture was, like a shepherd, he will care for his flock, gathering the lambs in his arms, hugging them as he carries them and leading the nursing ewes to good pasture. So for me, that was just something that's, I knew where Isaac was. There was a peace that came with it. I felt really, it was like God saying, I'm with you in all this. Like, you know, as terrible as this is, I'm here. I'm here. I didn't make this happen, but I'm here. And later on after that, it was like, I don't know how to describe it except like being in a cocoon. There was a definite presence of God that wrapped its arms around us as a family, that really carried us through the next, you know, days, weeks, and months to come. And as painful as it was, there was also an incredible comfort of God as well in it as well too, in how he just, you know, through people, through just his presence in our home and all those things, really made a difference for us walking through the worst thing a parent has to walk through.
Wow. Okay. So that, you see, this is like the part where you came to the grips that this is what's happening, and it just broke your heart. My question to you is, there are so many people who are at a loss in life. We all come through losses in life, whether it's a loss of a loved one or a loss of a child way before their time, a loss of maybe a job or an income, a loss of understanding through a season. There's a loss of one's purity, or what someone's like, maybe someone violated them. There's so many ways that we can experience losses in life.
Yeah.
My question to you is, okay, in the face of this, now one thing that I thought was so interesting about your language is that you're talking about how God was with you in this season. I think that I've read countless messages of people as a pastor who write me and say, well, where was God in this? How can you say God is there? That's when I stopped believing God. I abandoned my faith. I resigned it, and I hung it up when that took place in my life. And yet here you are talking about how God was with you in the trouble. Where did that framework, and even more so the foundation of a faith like that, come from?
Well, I just felt that it was absolutely God's supernatural love for me that actually cocooned us all as a family in the midst of all this incredible trauma and trouble and grief. Absolutely. But that didn't stop the fact that I still needed to walk through mourning, and I still had my questions.
Right.
I can't deny that God's presence was there, and I never would.
Wow.
But through my mourning process, because that's the journey of where healing really happens, I had to revisit, a lot of these things and even new emotions that were coming up as to how I was feeling about God, how I was feeling about my own loss and pain, and watching my kids have to deal with it through their eyes as well. So I'm not only mourning for myself, I'm also mourning as a parent for my other kids, watching them going through their loss.
Yeah.
So to know that God
will deal with the initial shock. Like, I'm sure that everyone has a different way of coping, I'm sure.
Yes, there is. And age groups are really important in the way of watching children. Kids can only deal with what they know, but children that are quite young, like Ethan's age, like Ethan was about 2.5, 3 at the time, and Ethan doesn't remember a whole lot about that. So he still has questions, but Ethan grew up for years and years and years saying to me, Mommy, why can I not be a big brother? He's always wanted to be a big brother. Ethan would ask me that question for even up until he was like 12 and 13 years old. It was just the way that his little heart as a young child had internalized his grief, and that was the way that it was processed. Where Naomi, on the other hand, was like, she was 6 years old at the time, so things in that world is black and white, so you tell me this or you tell me that. Right. And to see that, she just couldn't, well, why can't we just pray for him and make Jesus make him better and bring him home, kind of thing. Rebecca, on the other hand, was 11, so for her, it was definitely way more of a shock and a trauma to her, because she was his second mother basically as well too. Yeah. And for her, it just really emotionally shut her down. And I definitely became concerned about Rebecca probably about 8-9 months into our loss and into our grieving process, because it was very hard and difficult for her to talk about this stuff. I think that for her, and we never shied away from it. Tears are not a sign of weakness. We talk about everything and anything. There's no question that's not on the table. You go ahead.
you know, but still for her, there was a fear that came in with it, I think. And, you know, as a child too, your mortality is, you look at that. Well, then if I just lost my little brother, could I lose my mommy and daddy? Could I lose, you know, somebody else that I love? Like, oh my gosh, I never thought of, could I die? You know, so it does trigger a lot of questions in children, and they mourn just as much as we do as adults. They just do it very differently as to their age group. But we know that we do not just mourn the past, we also mourn the future. So there's things in our lives as a family that you know, we're missing somebody should be here. You know, big things that can happen, you know, whether it's somebody getting married or, you know, some big anniversary or something in somebody's life. There should be somebody else that should be with us as a family. So yes, but having to navigate them through this, and then recognizing that my own grief at first was so insular, like everything was inside. And I absolutely tried to control everything, though. Emotionally, yes, I can say that I had my faith, my friends, and my family to help me through. But I began to try to control my emotions in it all. And in the grieving process, there's two parts of grief. There's the grief, which is the emotions and the feelings and all of that, the trauma, everything that's going inwards for the first bit of time. And later on, the mourning, which happens probably, you know, 3-4 months into it, where all of these emotions start coming to the surface, and people feel that, oh my gosh, I just did, you know, I don't think I could cry any more tears or feel any more emotion. And all of a sudden this starts coming to the surface, and it can be very scary and very confusing and very painful for people. But in my situation,
so you're basically drawing out the difference between, hey, to help everyone understand, there's a big difference between mourning and grieving.
Very much so.
And that it's the grieving stage that actually comes later.
No, mourning comes later.
Mourning comes later.
Yeah, mourning is like grief going public now. So grief is all of the emotions and everything going inward. So that's the initial trauma, the shock, the funeral, all of those, you know, the first few weeks and months of trying to now, you know, grapple with this thing that's happened to you and reconcile with it. And wow, it's just
almost like, and then the mourning is now dealing with what's happening in you.
Exactly. So it's now the grief going public. It is where you find people that get into a lot of anger, a lot of guilt, a lot of depression, a lot of, you know, extreme sadness, all of those things. There's different manifestations of it. And that's where people find that it can be a little difficult if they don't have support or understanding with it a bit, because, you know, if you don't understand it, you tend to do what I did, and that's stuff it. So let's push it down. But one thing that I have discovered about grief and mourning is that it's never denied, it's only delayed. You know, this is the way that we're created to heal, and that to process anything, any kind of loss, like you were talking about, loss, even the traumatic stuff of going through a pandemic and not being able, and having a loved one die and not being able to even go to a funeral or have anything like that.
You're not even able to do an official goodbye.
Exactly. And it's very, very difficult, because that compounds your mourning. It definitely creates a lot of questions to be asked and a lot of pain to actually process with no answers.
Wow.
Right. And that can make it a little bit more difficult for sure for people. But losses of health, losses of job, of income, of security, of a marriage, I mean, we could talk about any kind of losses, but in order to process something, it has to come up and out. And that's where real healing happens. And I was just very, very much a mourning avoidant. I felt that I needed to make life normal for my 3 kids as much as I could after this loss. And so I put all my mourning was on the back burner, and I just tried to control everything. But, you know, it just wasn't happening for me. I was losing the battle badly. I was becoming extremely angry. I was becoming very cynical and despondent and all of that stuff. And here I thought that I was going to be getting better with time, and actually I was getting worse.
And so let me ask you, so there's so many questions, and I think the big distinction that I'm hearing is that there's a big difference between moving on and moving forward.
Absolutely.
And I think that some people just stuff it down, and
Yeah.
it acts like, oh, life is carrying on. I'm going, but
Right.
inwardly they're just corroding, you know?
Absolutely. Absolutely. What you end up doing is, as you're stuffing it and so forth, you're trying to make sense out of something that doesn't make sense. And your new normal, you're definitely looking at that and saying, well, I'm going to try to control this new normal in the way that I feel is good for me. And it's not necessarily the healthiest way to do that. You know, to be bereaved actually means to have special needs. And that's what that's what I discovered as well for myself. And that no two people on this planet will ever mourn the same. To the depth that you love the person you lost will be the depth that you mourn that person.
Wow.
Right? And it absolutely makes sense. And to actually, the mourning process literally forces us to slow down and go inward. That's why you feel lethargic. You have no energy. It's even hard to get out of bed in the morning and all that kind of stuff. I think that with trauma, and with even death as being trauma, the impact of it, if our bodies were to release, if we got into a really bad car accident, if our bodies were to release the amount of trauma that we have endured, as quickly, even through loss, as we've received it, we wouldn't be able to do it. It'd kill us. We wouldn't be able to endure it. So it's the body's way of slowing down. And actually, to be sad and to go through a little bit of depression, which is normal in grief, literally what it's doing is the body's way of even protecting your major organs, which is bizarre, the way that we have been created in which to heal. So it's all a normal process. It's just, unfortunately, the society in which we live in that becomes very mourning avoidant. They don't know what to do with our pain, so they just try to stay away from it as much as they can by words of trying to say encouragement. Oh, he wouldn't want you to cry, or oh, she wouldn't want to see you like this, or just keep yourself busy, or whatever. But those, as well intentioned as those comments are, can actually stop us from actually the healing process, because the journey is that you have to go through. You can't go around.
What would you say to people then who are surrounding those who are walking out misery right now, who are trying to manage, treat a trauma in their lives, and they know of a trauma that's taken place in somebody's life, a life or a loss that they're navigating? What would you say to the people that are surrounding them? I think that in the church world especially, we can kind of say all the wrong things at times.
With good intention.
You got to have a level of compassion. I know that we get it. It's like, they mean well, but gosh, it's like, are you serious right now? You know what I mean? But I think it's equally very uncomfortable for people. They don't know what to do or how to act.
Yeah.
What would you say to being the person who's suffering?
Yeah. Well, I think one of the biggest things, the revelations for me is that after all of this journey of us and stuff, Stafford and I felt very, very compelled with the compassion that we had and the comfort we had been given, that we ended up doing some grief support groups. And starting that up was very intimidating for me at first as well too. But I felt that God said to me, you're not here to fix anybody. I am. All you are there is to companion people. And if I could share anything with anybody that is supporting somebody in their life that is going through a loss or is really having a difficult time, it's not to try to push and pull that person into what you feel they should be at. Lots of times it's to pretty much sit in the ash heap with them. It is, to companion, to come alongside them. Ask them the questions as, how are you feeling today? Or things that not trying to fix it, but saying, I can't imagine what that would be like. So companioning somebody isn't really trying to create an environment where they're going to be well very quickly. It is creating a safe space, a safe atmosphere for them to be able to feel that they're not going to be judged.
Yep. That
they're going to be able to share and express, right? Tears are not a sign of weakness. It's actually showing, what the heart loves. That's why it weeps. And it's an expression of all of that. So people trying to be tough and stick it out and all that kind of stuff, it's not necessarily a good thing. Although we should take breaks from our grief because it's can be very exhausting and hard work.
Zooming, I'm sure.
Yeah, very much so. But it's actually just seeing what the person needs in the way of encouragement just by asking those questions.
Right. So, so all in all, when it comes to how to navigate with those people, it's really just being like a very present help in the sense of not trying to fix anything, but just trying to be there.
Exactly.
Process.
Yeah, exactly. And they'll usually tell you, through the time as to things that they're having a hard time with. I know for myself, the first few months of walking through the initial stages of my grief, I would want to tell my story over 300 times a day if I had somebody to listen.
Wow. So you were nursing it and rehearsing it.
Absolutely. Because and it wasn't necessarily for the other person to hear. It was for me to hear. It was how I needed to process. And another thing we discovered, Stafford and I, in grief is that men and women grieve very, very differently. Men have, yes, men definitely.
So in the initial, and forgive me, I don't want to cut you off where you're going there, but so there was obviously, I was wondering how the initial shock and the trauma affected the relationships around you at large.
Shock, relationships, you mean about our family and friends as well, or just our marriage?
At a friendship level, a church, in the community that you belong to, like, how did you walk in a room? Did relationships shift? Did things?
Very much so.
Does anything look the same and feel the same after a trauma like that?
No, your values change. Very much so, I would say. And you definitely value more people than you do things. Now, with regards to relationships and so forth, for sure, sometimes to create a safe space for you to heal, your friends that might have been closer to you that may not feel as safe anymore, sometimes that happens. It doesn't mean that they're bad people. It just means well-intentioned people sometimes just don't know or understand how to support somebody going through grief. So yes, there were definitely some that were our inner circle that became our outer circle. And surprisingly, some from our outer circle became into our inner circle.
So would you say, I've often heard this saying, but many people articulate this kind of notion that, I can be in the midst of a crowd and never feel so alone.
Yes, absolutely. A lot of things were, unfortunately, even through the church sometimes, that we feel that if God won't give us more than we can bear, or that, your faith's going to get you through, or what, like we have these cliches that we say.
Totally.
And we don't realize how if you sit down and think about them, how painful they can be for somebody going through loss, because basically you're telling them that they're weak. So they're losing on the side of their grief because they're not grieving properly, and they're also losing on the side of their faith because they're not expressing their faith properly. So that can really be a double indemnity for people and make them feel as if they're just not winning on any level. 100%.
So I think that's something that the church at large, we could learn so much from. But at the same time, people are going to be people, which is,
Absolutely. It's all based on our understanding of death. It's our understanding of grieving, how we were raised. All of those things have a bearing on how we do this and how we help other people, if we do or not, to support them through it.
Well, how did it affect not just your relationships at large, but maybe, those closest to you and the dynamics between your family, and then even more so to your spouse, to Stafford himself? I'm sure that you guys all coped with everything very differently.
Oh,
and I know there's a lot of people out there whose families break apart because they just cannot seem to pick up the pieces. And I know, I'm sure there's people listening today.
Yeah, absolutely. We had heard even from others, even the get-go from our loss about, watch your marriage, be careful. They'd say that 80% in marriages that have lost a child end up losing their marriage. And my thought was, oh my gosh, you're kidding me. So now I've lost my son and I'm going to lose my marriage now too? Like, what? But as when we did receive support, and there was some really good teaching around that was just, we found out that from research that it was just not true. So a lot of marriages, unfortunately, that are already on rocky grounds, are going through a really tough time. Something like this can tip it over if they don't get support. Staff and I weren't looking at it that way, but it definitely changed the way that we grieve, for sure, because men and women, like I said, grieve very, very differently. And there was some strife through that, for sure, like points that I needed support, and he was also not in a good place and that kind of thing. So it was back and forth for a while. But once we did get some really good support in that, when we were, understanding and learning and just God's hand in it all, to the difference between men and women and how we grieve different and why we grieve differently created in me and in him an ability to support and to respect each other now.
Wow.
So I had to really release Stafford from a lot of judgments I had, and to forgive him and him to forgive me for judgments he's had over me, so that we could now start to communicate and understand that we're not the enemy, that
That's
yes,
right.
it's absolute tough, it's crazy, but let's communicate through this and just understand this is the way you're wired, this is the way I'm wired.
I heard my counselor, for those of you who didn't know, I love counseling, psychotherapy, I believe in all of it. And
Yeah.
but one of the greatest pieces of advice she gave Jules and I, obviously not navigating a crisis of any sorts like this, but just in a general level, is saying, helping us realize that to each other, we are literally, there is nobody who has that place in our lives like we do as spouses to one another.
Absolutely.
We are each other's biggest support and cheerleading squad. We're not a firing squad.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that for many people, it's a big revelation. You can almost forget, like, oh yeah, this is the person we need to have each other's backs and help support each other. And I love what you said. It's like they're not the enemy. They are co-laborers. They are people who are going through this with you. And yeah,
absolutely. I would say that our marriage right now, as to where we are, is based on absolutely having this level of communication and going into the hard places and everything else. And even if anything good came out of the loss of our son, was how our marriage has been so much strengthened through it. Like I definitely walk through anything with my husband now and navigate it all because of this.
Foundations that will be laid when your faith comes under fire and your family comes under fire like that. Know that the foundations would have to be strong.
Yes, absolutely. And that did that. But that you have to give God permission to go there into those places and to say, okay, I'm going to, show you some stuff that you may not like about you, that I didn't bring this to you, but I can take it and turn it around.
Wow.
But guess what's going to happen out of it is that you're definitely going to have to walk in humility and allow me to go there and work hard on this in the way that you guys communicate.
Well, that leads me to a thought, because in this pandemic, I've heard, oh man, the quarrels of quarantine, and I'm sure that as the proximity has created so many problems for people just because we're stacked on top of each other. If you do have children, we're blessed to have them, but it can be chaotic. It can be loud. You realize how small your quarters may be when you realize that you're in each other's faces all day long. But one of the things I heard many, sages of wisdom out there kind of articulate through the internet was, actually the pandemic, if anything, if it comes to your marriage and problems being revealed within your marriage, is probably because there already existed. And this is only through the proximity bringing it forward.
Absolutely.
And I think there's something, that's it. When the fire comes out, what's inside comes out, like it's the pressure, it squeezes what's in.
Yeah. There's no running from it really. So you can choose to avoid, but if you want the growth and the opportunity that's there to grow, it's going to make you become vulnerable, and being vulnerable is going to be it.
I love how you said it is not denied. It is only delayed.
That's right.
That you either deal with it or it will eventually deal with you.
Absolutely. There's no running.
Brilliant. Hey, what was one thing that you appreciated about, did Stafford ever say anything to you or do anything for you that really helped you in your journey?
Well, I think just the way that he supported me through supporting our children, I felt in ways that probably I was failing as a mother or something, or just because I was still even denial of my own grief and all of that stuff, but he was always there to say and to be my biggest cheerleader on as to how much of a mom I was, and how that my support of them and what I poured into them now, we would, would matter. It would make. So being that cheerleader in that support when I felt that I'd completely failed everything was very, very, very intentional, and it was really something that was so significant as to how I felt valued by him through it all, for sure. So it was that, and that he was there, like it was like a tag team, that he knew I had all day with them, and he'd come home, and so those things that he would put even his own grief to the side for a period of time so that he could come in and support me, and that's really what his heart was at.
And that's a question that I had for you. Like, how did you move forward? And move on from the loss, but yet still maintain being present for your children. How did you practice self-care while just trying to manage everyone else's misery?
Yeah. Self-care is probably one of the biggest things that I denied myself for a very long time, but realized that I needed to absolutely do that in order to survive. So it was a choice, and I had to be pretty diligent with it as well. And that would be making dates with Jesus or something like that. Like, okay, so what do you think, what would be your best date with going out on by yourself or something like that, or going out with a friend or whatever.
Yeah.
But it would be something that I would actually have to put on the calendar, no matter how much that I felt like, I could just stay in my sweats and not go anywhere. That was something
to do, even that might be easier to actually do, just to stay in your sweats. It's just,
for sure. Yeah, just throw on Netflix and, go a no-brainer for sure. But so it forced me to take a break from grief for sure, but do something that was good for me. So yes, that, and doing physical, like walks and things like that, those kinds of things. But recognizing that grief is really, really hard work, and it is very good to take breaks from it. And that's where self-care would be. So it's just being intentional with it. And you have to be intentional with it, because it's your physical heart as well as your emotional heart that needs to be healed and touched through this, right?
It's brilliant. It's brilliant. Oh man. So, you spoke, earlier how the first kind of manifestation of grief in your life is that it went insular.
Yes.
And I'm just curious if you could walk many of us through what were the stages that you experienced initially, and then what kind of are the stages of grief that kind of manifested themselves later and throughout the process?
I'll tell you a story about that. Some of the things at the very beginning were, they scared the heck out of me. When I was home alone at some point, and allowing myself to go there, I would be thinking about Isaac, and definitely there would be the tears and everything else. But sometimes the pain was so incredibly deep that I would find myself on the floor. Like I would be curled up in a fetal position on the floor crying. But there was a couple of times that this sound came out of me that sounded like a wounded animal, and it scared me. And I thought, if any of my children hear this, it would scare them too. I later found out that the name for that is called keening. And it's literally, the pain level that it feels like it's coming from the soles of your feet. Wow. And it is normal in that in amount of incredible pain that you're going through. So the keening part of it was something that scared me, but once I got to understand, I couldn't help it either. I felt that emotionally, these waves would come up and they would come up, and I would try to push them down and push. I don't have time for this right now. And if by the third time these emotions would come up and I wouldn't deal with them, they'd blow me over. I would be a basket case on the couch for days almost.
Right.
So I realized that I had to learn, I called it body surfing. So I had to sort of ride them out. And if it wasn't an opportune time, like, let's say in the grocery store, walking down the diaper aisle and having an armful of groceries, the smell of diapers comes up into me and I drop everything and go running out of the store.
Wow.
Those kinds of things were very scary to me, but I had enough good people around me that I could call out and say, okay, I feel like I'm going crazy. I don't know how to handle this.
Yeah.
And I thought I could take care of myself, and then, and it still didn't happen that way. So at the beginning, it was more or less trying to discover exactly what was happening to me. because I had no control over it as much as I tried. Later on in months, for the grieving part of that still all going in, the mourning part of that coming out, I would feel that there would be, yes, questions of guilt that would feel that, did I do everything as a mom? Was I attentive enough to be able to, and it's not that I would say that I was a bad mom or anything, but it was a very normal question. And I would be afraid sometimes to even voice that question to people because I would feel that I would be judged for that. So I would stuff that one too. Or then this anger for God started to happen in me, probably about 8 or 9 months. I was in my kitchen one day and the kids were not home and I was unloading the dishwasher. And I guess these feelings had been going on for a couple of days. And all of a sudden I had a handful of dishes, and without even thinking, I lifted these dishes up over my head and I was ready to heave them right across the kitchen, all of them. And I was so shocked as to how quickly that emotion came up and how it took over. Whoa. The anger that was attached with it. Finally looked up at the dishes, said, no, I like these dishes, I'm not going to throw them. And I put them down. But it was the whole point that something's not right here. Something is going on that I can't handle. I can't deal with this on my own, and I'm going to need help. And I realized that I was really mad at God. And I remember him saying to me once, he goes, you are really mad at me and I'm okay with it. We need to talk about it though. Wow. And I think it was a freedom for me and a release to say, these are hard questions that are okay to ask God. They are. The hard part is trusting him through it. I get that. But the questions and the feelings and the emotions are all right. And I think sometimes we kind of try to keep on the I'm okay mask with our Christian friends or our family and all that kind of stuff. And we meanwhile are going around inside and we're completely broken and crushed and hiding from the truth of what's going on. So having the freedom to do this and having those questions come up, and sometimes you're going to get the answers and sometimes you're not. For me to reconcile and to say, oh yeah, God cleared it all up for me and I know why it happened and this is the result of it and everything else. That's not true. But I've come to a place of reconcile where God has given me his peace from it, but I had to walk through. So not only was I grieving the loss of my son, I also now was on a grieving journey of my faith, because some of the stuff that I had believed God was showing to me, not necessarily lining up with what his word was saying and what was absolutely true and how I had come into this understanding. Some of it came from my family and the way I grew up. Others came from, different things I picked up through church, whatever. But some of the things that God was saying, okay, so here we go. Let's go on this journey together for that. And I would say now today that I not only mourned my son, like I said, but I mourned my faith, but what I have been replaced with has been something that is so special to me. I don't like the way and the path and the journey in which I received it, but I won't I would never change it for anything in this world.
Wow. Okay. So that, you see, this is like the part where people look back at tragedy and trauma, and it's not to say that, again, like you said, like I'm glad it happened, but I wouldn't change it.
I wouldn't change the way I got my faith and the relationship with God back. Oh yes. Mm-hmm.
So what did you discover about the nature and the character of God through your grief?
One word that I would use to surmise it that has always, always gripped me is his kindness. He is so kind and he's so gentle, and comfort is always there. His peace, I can't describe it, but that to me is that kindness. No matter how angry I was, no matter what I said to him, there was never, I felt I was ever rejected or denied anything from him, but in fact, actually felt him, the big bear hug of daddy all the more. And asking those things and releasing the pain that went with it. Like, where were you in the midst of all this? I was right there, right beside you. How could you let this happen to me? It wasn't my will that this happened. There's no plan B. Right? Bad things happen to good people, and it was not my will. So that is what I had to.
That is like that's one of the age-old questions. How can How can a God who's
a good God allow stuff like this to happen? It's not his plan, but he'll take it.
like, well, it never originates in the heart of God,
Mm-hmm.
but within the hands of God, he's still able to work all things together for the good of those who are the called according to his purpose. He's able to turn what the enemy meant for evil and turn it for good. And I think that's kind of what you're articulating, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely it is.
There's a silver lining, and it's like it was far from positive, but the promises of God still remain good.
Absolutely.
His nature still remained good. And I think that is a reconciliation. I know there's people tuning in right now that might even feel anger and the emotions of anger, even at the thought of this. What would you say to people who are navigating a loss and this nature? They're saying God, and they're not nursing it, they're not rehearsing it, but they're cursing.
Yeah, for sure. For sure they are. To understand that God understands our hearts better than we do, and totally is very compassionate with our pain and our tears. He's right there alongside us. It's up to us, obviously, to choose to turn to him, but to know that God never orchestrated this for your life, never did. But it is, bad things happening to good people. But he understands the pain of it all too, and he's a patient God. He'll never force us, he'll never push us or anything, but he will never deny us either. Mm-hmm. He's our safe place, right? And so I think that sometimes we do, shake our hand and shake our fist and say, God, where are you in this? And sometimes it's just like, well, open your eyes and watch. I am here, and I am here to bring you comfort if you will allow me. Mm-hmm. So sometimes it is just having a look around and he will show himself faithful for sure. Mm-hmm. Through others sometimes too.
Michele, what would you say to everyone and to everyone who might be tuning into it, like a message to those that are suffering loss? Like, what's your message?
Suffering loss? Yeah. As much as it's painful and it's devastating to most of our lives, it is becoming a new normal. It's like we've signed up for a membership club that we never asked for. It just is where we are right now. And to be kind to yourself and seek support if you need it, if you don't necessarily have good support around you. It is a process. Going through mourning is a process. It's not an event. It is a journey, and you have to go through it. You can't go around it. Mm-hmm. So support is out there, and God will definitely get you through. And the comfort that he gives is something that is life-changing for sure.
Wow. What would you say, a message to those who are surrounding those suffering in a season like this?
To be patient and kind with them. Let them lead you rather than you lead them. It's so easy for us to see someone in pain and feel very, very helpless. What can I do? What can I say to make this person feel better? But sometimes when people are in that deep place of pain and darkness, they don't necessarily need the answers. They just need to know that you care, that you listen, and that you've come alongside. You are a safe place without judgment in order to help them through a very, very difficult part of their life. And it's going to go up and down.
I suppose there's one last question I have for you. And, as Christians, we believe that it's like, hey, John 11, though he die, he will live. Do you believe this? Jesus asked the question.
Yes.
As Christians, I believe that at death, it's not a goodbye of sorts, but it's more so a see you later.
Absolutely.
I was in a meeting a couple of years ago now where a man with an incredible gift of prophecy, of the prophetic, he's hearing the voice of God. I believe that God speaks today. And obviously, if we as Christians believe that our loved ones are in heaven, they're with Jesus, when they put their faith in him and they're taken to heaven, the reality is that then we believe that they're still very much alive. They're still very much well. As a matter of fact, sometimes when they're suffering with such sickness or disease, it's like they're in a much better place, a much more comfortable state being with Jesus, as painful as it is for us to say goodbye to them. Absolutely. However, I was in this meeting, and this guy starts to call people out. In that same meeting, he called my family out by name, and he called out my birthday. I'm like, whoa, who is this guy? And I remember I cried for days following it because of how personal it was. I remember feeling so seen by God in the moment. He called out my family by name, but in particularly, he called my son Jude. His name's Judah. But when he called him Jude, many people wouldn't realize, but that's actually what we call him in the house. As much as his name is Judah, we call him Judes. And so it was so personal. And in this one moment, he pivoted from a word from a bunch of people, one of which was our family, and he named a name and a date. And all of a sudden, you just heard someone start wailing over to the right of us. And he goes, that was a hard day, wasn't it? And we're like, wait, what? And he goes, Jesus wants you to know that such and such a person is here with me today in heaven. Wow. And he wants to pass on a message to you. And he went on to articulate something that was personal between the man the person who had passed and the person in the room who was receiving the word, to bring this reassurance that God saw him and that he was truly with Jesus. And I remember being there wasn't a dry eye in the room. It was so profound. It was so powerful. It was like nothing I had seen or experienced before. But what it really impressed upon me was the fact that, wow, like we may pass from this dimension into the next. We may go from here into heaven with Christ, but
absolutely,
our relationships continue. And that was something that was so apparent in that moment. I guess my question to you is, what does your relationship to Isaac look like now? Because I'm sure you believe as much as the next person, you're going to see him again. So he never truly passes. You carry him with you.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yes. We don't mourn like that. We have no hope. We have hope. So I have hope. I know I will see him again. The story I was telling you about when I found myself on the floor keening, that level of pain, once I collected myself and sat up again on the chair, I had this vision, if you will. And I had this picture in my head of Isaac in a meadow, playing and running around. And all of a sudden I realized that he wasn't alone, and that Jesus was there with him, and he was chasing him in this meadow. And he caught him, and he started tickling him, and he started throwing him up in the air. And all of a sudden I heard myself say, throw him higher, Jesus. He loves that. Because when he was young and Stafford would pick him up and throw him in the air, he would love it and go, higher, Daddy, higher. All Stafford's arms would be dying. And meanwhile, this child wanted to be thrown in the air constantly. So I said to Jesus, throw him higher, with tears streaming down my face. All of a sudden, the Lord started throwing him higher, and then gets him down on the ground, and he was tickling him, and he's and I'm crying, but absolutely overwhelmed of the interaction of God, Jesus, and Isaac at the time, and what it's doing to my heart in the midst of this incredible pain. And I'll tell you the truth. At one point, when they sat down on the ground, Isaac turned and looked at me and said, Mommy, I'm okay. I'm okay, Mommy. I'm with Jesus. And that absolutely floored me, but it wrapped my heart in God's love. Is no matter how the depth of my pain was, I knew where Isaac is. I know that I will see him again. And it brought more hope that only God could bring to me. No other person could except God. And it's just being open to that, of hearing him. And so I have no doubt, for sure. And that blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. That's one of my favorite scriptures. That is the comfort of the Holy Spirit. He understands what we have to deal with on this side of heaven. And he knows that we are frail. And he knows that, these things are tough things that we have to go through in life. But he said that he promised that he will be there with us and walk us through. So that's my hope, for sure.
You know what, Michele, honestly, you've been so articulate. My gosh. I mean, I think it's fair to say that everyone tuning in is incredibly grateful for your vulnerability and your openness to be able to explore that. I know that even to talk about it, you'd have to access all kinds of emotions and to go back into those places and spaces where maybe some people would just prefer to keep shut and keep tucked away, like you said, to bury it. But you've really bore it. You've borne your pain and you've walked through it. And we have become beneficiaries of that because we're able to glean from your wisdom. We're able to lean in and listen to you and to learn a lot of what it is to suffer loss. And I think that for everyone tuning in, oh man, I hope you're as grateful as I am for the wisdom that she shared with us today. I was hoping that as we close things off, that you might be willing, honestly, just to pray for us all, to pray for those that are suffering in this season. To anybody who's, you know, at a loss of any kind in the season, if you could just pray a prayer of faith or whatever kind you
Sure.
feel to kind of deliver to us here today, but pray for us.
Yeah. So Father, I just want to thank you so much for your goodness and your faithfulness, and to know that when people are walking through really tough times and hard times, that you are there. You are closer than a brother. You are always there, willing, able to reach out and to draw us into your heart and to pour in your comfort and your love and your healing. So Lord, I pray for each and every person today that is dealing with any kind of painful, whether it's loss through death or any other kind of loss that they're going through right now. God, you know exactly each and every individual and what they're dealing with. And only you, Father, can bring the resolve or the healing that is needed, and the comfort, Holy Spirit, that would bring complete healing into their lives. So I pray, Father, that there would be such an understanding and a revelation, even for those that may have thought that they're going crazy or not understanding the emotions that they're dealing with, and that they are normal, but that God, that you are there willing and able to draw them into the places of where they need to be in order to receive the healing on their journey and through this mourning process. So Holy Spirit, I just pray that as you reveal yourself to each and every person listening to this, God, that they would have a new awakening, a new understanding that you are a good Father, that you are not the ones that bring all of this destruction and death into life, but God, that you are one that can take it and turn it around.
Yes.
And for your glory. And I pray that today, Lord, that all of us, Lord, would be able to even understand deeper and greater as to what it is that you can and do, and the relationship that you want for each and every one of us with you. So God, I speak blessing over each and every one today in Jesus' name. Amen.